This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Abbot.
4 minutes past 10. Good evening. This is Nick Abbot on LBC. Later in this hour, we're going to cross live to Kyiv for the latest on the invasion of Ukraine. But in the past few minutes, as you've heard, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been speaking.
I think we have to face the hideous reality that the diplomacy, as far as President Putin was concerned, was a charade. He never really intended to alter his course. You read the article that he wrote many months ago. It was clear that he's attached to a weird, semi-mystical view of Ukraine as part of Russia. And that is a view that the Ukrainian people fervently, passionately reject. And they're showing that they will fight to reject it. Our job now is to help them, to help change the very heavy odds that they face. And that's why we're sending the support that we are.
That's Boris Johnson. He spoke with the Ukrainian president earlier this evening. Tim Marshall is on the line. He's a foreign affairs analyst and author and joins me now. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Nick.
So what did you make of what Boris Johnson was saying?
They're in it for the long haul. That even after, assuming Kyiv does fall, and that's the probability, and the country is divided in two or even worse, that there's going to be a long haul in this fight. And I think that the most significant thing that happened today was actually the Germans saying that they're going to send 1,000 anti-tank weapons, because it's the anti-tank weapons that the British and Americans have given to the Ukrainians over the past few months, which is exactly what has slowed the Russian advance and caused such heavy casualties upon them. So after a bit of prevarication, and I think the British was partially led the way, there is now a real sense that a coalition is growing, and NATO, the EU, many other countries have actually seemed to be putting their money where their mouth is, that both in terms of economic sanctions and military aid, and they're going to be in this for the long haul. That even if the capital falls, that's not the end of it.
There's been a lot of people saying that Putin must be disappointed, to put it mildly, at the success of his advance so far. What do you think the truth of that is?
I understand that, but the Russian way of maneuver warfare is slower than the Americans. They don't go for what's called the thunder run. I predicted a few weeks ago, when I thought this was going to happen, that they would be at Kyiv between 3 and 5 days. Now, they got there within 2 days, but they still haven't taken it. But I'll be surprised if they haven't taken it after 5 days. And I think what we're going to see, sadly, is because they will be disappointed at the losses that they've taken, I worry that they are going to take the gloves off. Sorry, it's a clumsy phrase, given that this is warfare and there's been a lot of loss of life already, but there is footage of them bringing up the type of weaponry which is going to inflict a lot more pain upon the Ukrainian people. But there's been a clear lack of leadership, it would appear, amongst some of the Russian brigades. There's been some heavy defeats that they've suffered. They clearly have lost dozens of armoured vehicles. And I think this is going to be a surprise to them. And I think the other surprise that Kremlin elite will have is the depth of feeling against them. And I think that they will be surprised at how so far the international response to them has been almost uniform. I suspect from everything that Putin has said over the past couple of years that he believes the West to be fundamentally weak and divided and not prepared to step up when it's required. But it appears that such is the shock, such is the outrage about what has happened, that in fact he's galvanized the NATO nations into remembering what their raison d'etre is.
Yes, it's ironic, isn't it, that his actions have actually united the West and NATO in the manner that they have not been in for many decades.
Yeah, and that might hold. I mean, again, he probably expects down the line that resolve will weaken and he can peel one or two countries off. But there's been some quite surprising condemnation. I mean, Turkey might have been expected to prevaricate because it's been riding two horses for some years now. NATO member, but it's been cozying up to the Russians to a point, but they have clearly come out in support of Ukraine. And another one is Hungary. Viktor Orban, the prime minister there, has been an apologist to the Kremlin for many, many years, but they have condemned this as well. And I think that what's happened is that those type of authoritarian leaders who run authoritarian democracies have read the runes, seen the uniform blanket condemnation of this naked aggression against a sovereign nation, and have thought better than to sit on the fence. So we don't know if Kyiv can hold out. I suspect it can't. The Russians are actually bringing in more and more heavy armor, as well as the infantry to the outskirts of the capital. They will probably take one or two more cities. But the longer it goes on, the more money it costs. I mean, this is costing an absolute fortune for the Russians. The response, the worldwide response of closing down airspace so their airplanes can't fly anywhere and their ships can't dock anywhere. And on Monday morning, you will see probably a run on the Russian banks. You will see their stock market collapsing, and the shock of it all. So I think what the Ukrainians are going to try and do is hold out as long as possible and cause so much pain to the Russians that eventually the Russians settle. But that's projecting forward, and at the moment they're in, and Putin cannot afford, now he's gone in, to withdraw, because that would be the end of Putin.
He says that he wants to have talks, to have diplomacy under certain conditions. Do you think there's any truth in that?
Yes, his conditions, which at the moment is abject surrender. I mean, he did. He hinted very strongly in, I think it was yesterday, one of his statements, that he's open to his officials going to Minsk in Belarus and meeting officials from Ukraine and talking about it. But the manner, his language suggested that his version of that would be that Ukraine would go there and surrender. And at the moment, that is simply not going to happen. I mean, the Russians do not appear to have taken a major city. They may have taken one of the big towns near Mariupol on the Sea of Azov coast, but they have not taken a single big city yet, and they're all at the moment holding out. And I really think the Russians are being bled. The Americans lost in the entire Iraq campaign, I think it's something like 4,500 troops. Now, we don't know the losses to the Russians so far, and I think the Ukrainian claims of 3,500 dead Russians are probably exaggerated. But even if you halve that, in 3 days to lose 1,500 troops, and I think that's plausible, shows you just how bloody this is for the Russians as well as the Ukrainians.
There is some breaking news just in that the EU has reached a deal to cut Russia out of the SWIFT banking system. Yeah. What's the significance of that?
Well, that's why I was saying I suspect there's going to be this run on the stock exchange and the banks on Monday. And again, the Italians were prevaricating, the Cypriots, the Germans, the French were nervous, and that's because the French have got owed $25 billion by Russian banks, and if you cut Russia out of SWIFT, there is no way of paying back the debt that they owe to the Austrian banks, the Italian banks, the French banks, etc. But again, again, such is the shock and the horror and revulsion as what has happened that the EU has come together and decided, they're going to do that. SWIFT, in case anyone doesn't know still, there's 11,000 financial institutions around the world that use this. Just about every bank in the world uses it, and it's used in every single country. There's only two countries that are not allowed to use it, and I think it's North Korea and Iran. And if you don't have it, you can't make financial transactions around the globe. So the ability of Russians, ordinary Russians, let's say just trying to use Apple Pay or whatever, won't be able to. Your credit cards won't work. You won't be able to transfer money from one place to another. That's going to really hit their ability. Now, again, this was partially priced in by the Russians. Their foreign reserves, they've built them up to about $650 billion in hard currency, so that they can take this pain for a period. And also, of course, remember, the Russian economy is based on oil being sold at $45 a barrel, and at the moment it's around about $100 a barrel. So, don't expect the Russians to suddenly retreat on Monday morning because of it, but it is going to hurt.
What about the people in Russia? Because if their credit cards don't work, then they're going to be alarmed, to put it mildly. Is it true that in recent years Russia has, with a view to this exact scenario, sort of set up their own payment system? Yeah,
they have. They've done a number of things along. I mean, there's lots of things. For example, they've moved all their internet servers inside the borders of Russia, and they have the ability to cut Russia off from the rest of the world, and as far as the internet is concerned, and in case they ever need to take action inside Russia, so the rest of the world doesn't know what's going on inside Russia. So it's that sort of mindset that also led them to try to set up their own internal payment systems. And yes, they can. You will be able to carry on shopping in Russia, but you won't be able to shop on Amazon.
Just to go back to the oil, oil is traded in dollars. If they don't have access to the banking system to buy and sell in dollars, how are they going to sell their oil?
Well, this is the flaw in the sanctions, because we're not going to stop buying their oil and gas because we need it. Germany, for example, 35% of its gas comes out of Russia. I think these are pre-existing contracts, and also the European Union countries have actually been increasing the orders. Now, whether it's prepaid, I don't know. And I'll be honest with you, you've asked me a question that I don't fully know the answer to, but I'm confident that one way or another, Russia will be selling its oil because it knows that the Europeans need it.
Just on that subject, I mean, tell me if it's outside your field of expertise, but can liquid natural gas and the OPEC nations, can they fill in the gaps if Russia either turns off or we refuse to accept any of their petrol and any of their oil and gas?
Partially, yes. That's already happening. Again, a bit of background. After the Fukushima nuclear disaster following the tsunami of 2004, I think it was, the Germans did away with all their nuclear power, and they were also phasing out coal. But the gap between that and then having renewables hasn't been bridged, and so they've been increasingly dependent on Russian gas. Some of the Baltic states, and I think it's Poland as well, have been busy building LNG, liquid natural gas terminals on the Baltic coast, precisely to get in LNG so they can try to wean themselves off Russian gas, so far with very limited success. But the terminals are being built, the pipelines are being built. Qatar is a big supplier, and they have said they will try to supply more. Australia, I think, sells LNG, and the Americans have LNG, which they've sent over. So yes, they can alleviate, but then they're not close to replacing Russian gas. We really are hooked into it. As and when we try to pivot away from it, which takes years, the Russians will try then to sell more and more to China and to build their pipeline infrastructure going that direction, which actually brings me to a wider point. The very fact that they are going to be heading further east is part of what this whole thing is about, this delineation, this new Iron Curtain that has just come down. I think it's been built for several years between the authoritarian states and between the liberal democracies with all their faults. And I think that fault line has just been very clearly demonstrated over the past 3 days.
China is sort of balancing on a thin line here, though, isn't it? Because it's dependent on the West to buy its products, but it also has achieved some sort of partnership, for want of a better word, with Russia. What significance do you think about the UN resolution vote that China didn't? It abstained rather than objected.
Well, I'll be honest with you, Nick, just getting it to abstain is something of a victory and tells you that China is not actually overwhelmingly in support. I was surprised. I thought China would veto, but it hasn't. And just abstaining is actually a bit of a diplomatic minor coup. Doesn't change much, but in the long term, it has shown that China does not particularly approve of this operation. But sorry, you were asking about Chinese goods. I mean, we're not going to stop. They're not going to stop building their goods, and we're not going to stop buying them. Russia will continue, and it is a partnership in which Russia is a junior partner. But I was just looking at the wider point that there are the authoritarian states now, and Russia and China are developing a partnership, and they're the two biggest authoritarian states. But you can draw a line from Kaliningrad on the Baltic coast, down through Belarus, through the Russian border, Iran, across the Central Asian states, and then down to China and the South China Sea. And on one side of it are the authoritarian states, and on the other side of it are versions of the liberal democracies. And this, for me, is the new Cold War, and it's been forming for several years now, but I don't think many people, including myself, thought it would get quite as bad as this.
Let me just finally ask you briefly about Sweden and Finland, because Vladimir Putin's threatened Sweden and Finland.
Yeah, since they're not in NATO, and of course Finland suffered Soviet occupation, and the Russian subs and planes often harass Swedish waters and airspace. And since 2014, since the occupation and annexation of Crimea and the occupation de facto of the parts of the Donbass, both of those countries have looked very nervously across at Russia and thought, well, maybe we'll be in their sights, because, of course, Putin's went to Georgia and he's gone into Ukraine knowing that they're not NATO countries, therefore it doesn't trigger Article 5, therefore we are not going to fight for them. And as long as Sweden and Finland are outside of NATO, they worry that they could suffer the same fate. So the debate, which just simply wasn't a debate until 2014, neither country was interested in joining NATO because they would rather be neutral. But subsequent to 2014, they have, and this has really concentrated their minds. And they were both invited and accepted the invitation to join the NATO ambassadors meeting yesterday. So they might now apply. And everything that Putin was trying to combat is actually turning against him. I mean, NATO is now going to reinforce left, right, and centre. The British are sending a brigade of tanks, for example, to Estonia. Sweden and Finland are considering joining NATO. Poland and Romania are being reinforced by the Americans and others. The Spanish are flying extra jets, I think, down to Romania, etc., etc. The opposite of what Putin wanted is happening.
Good to talk to you, Tim. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
That's Tim Marshall, Foreign Affairs Analyst and author. In a few moments, as a curfew remains in place across the capital city, we're going to cross live to Kyiv to get the latest. And, of course, I'll take your calls. 0345 6060 973. Should the UK be doing more to support the Ukrainian people?
Nick Abbot on LBC.
Let's go live to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Richard Ensor is on the phone. He is the Ukrainian correspondent for The Economist. Hello, Richard.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. What's the latest?
Well, another day, and this war is, taking an enormous toll on everybody's energy. And but I think I speak for a lot of people in a lot of people around the world who. Sorry, I will start again. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that the response of the Ukrainian people and in particular the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been absolutely admirable. And some of the resolve that we are seeing is really something that a lot of us didn't expect when this war broke out just 72 hours ago.
Yes, there's been some remarkable footage, people climbing on Russian tanks, kneeling in front of Russian tanks. And as you say, the president himself is a very impressive figure, isn't he?
Yes, you may have heard that today there were some reports that America thought it might be a good idea for him to leave the capital, to go somewhere to a safe place. So if the city was taken, the government could fight another day with him at the helm. And his response was, I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. This is a man who's hell bent, and he's increasingly Churchillian with every passing day. Churchill with a Twitter account, you might say.
So, just describe what life is actually like, day to day in Kyiv. Is there any sense of normal life that can be lived at all?
I should say I've just personally moved from Kyiv to Lviv in just recently, in just shortly after the breakout of the war. But I'm in touch constantly with friends and colleagues who are in Kyiv, and I can tell you that no matter where you are in the city, the bombing is loud and intense. A lot of people are spending several hours a day underground in shelters. Other people are afraid to leave their apartments. I have friends sending me images over social media taken from their living rooms of tanks rolling by in the streets, Russian tanks that they can see. So the war is literally coming to people's doors now, and even as the Ukrainians put up a commendable fight, you are seeing some incursions and people, the Russian troops gaining kilometers and increasingly getting into a position where they are having Kyiv surrounded from all angles. That doesn't mean Kyiv is going to fall, but it means that the pressure is mounting.
And how far away from the capital are you then in Lviv?
So Lviv is a western outpost. It's a place to which a lot of refugees from Ukraine have been going because it's on the way to Poland. So there is another story cooking in this part of the country, which is a next migration crisis for Europe and the European Union. More than 100,000 Ukrainians have already crossed into Poland. The reason that number isn't higher is because the wait to take your car across the border right now is about 20 to 30 hours if you're lucky and you don't run out of gas. That is happening over here, and of course, the west of Ukraine is a nationalist stronghold. And if the government at some point, perish the thought, does fall, Lviv is a reasonable alternative to set up some kind of government in exile at that point. Sorry, please go on.
I was just going to ask, what sort of conditions are the people fleeing having to bear?
Well, it depends. A lot of people are fleeing in their cars. And, so I speak to people who have been in their cars for several days. I spoke to a woman who had a 27-hour uninterrupted drive from the east of Ukraine. So people are often in extremely, energy-deprived conditions when they turn up. People fearing for their life because they don't know, they don't have the perfect news, and they know that, Russian missiles are falling, and they're not particularly fussed about what happens if they hit the wrong target. So being a civilian anywhere in the country, being on an open road, is extremely stressful for them, and a lot of people are not getting enough sleep. So for some people, of course, they're turning up a little bit shaken but fine. But for others, it can be quite traumatic.
It might seem like a superficial question, but of course it's very important if you don't have shelter. What's the weather like there?
Oh, we're usually just dipping down below zero every evening, which is, certainly Ukraine is capable of a lot more than that, and we'll get towards the end of winter, so it certainly could be worse. But I have to say, one of the things that, in these terrible circumstances, we really are seeing the best of Ukraine, or people here, we are seeing the best of Ukraine. The amount of people who are, working hard to volunteer at migrant shelters which have popped up across this city. I've spoken to people, university students giving up their dormitories and rolling out mattresses on the floor so that internally displaced Ukrainians can sleep in their beds. That spirit of trusting complete strangers because a crisis means that you have to trust them is something that you see at every turn. And whether that's fighting the war itself or helping people run away from it, that collegial, fraternal, patriotic behavior is something that I think is not just beautiful in its own right, but actually an example to the rest of Europe, to the United Kingdom, and to the world.
Good to talk to you, Richard. Thanks so much for your time. Richard Enser, the Ukrainian correspondent for The Economist, joining us live from Lviv in Ukraine. After the news, I'm going to take your calls, 0345 6060 973. We'll also be going over to hear the view from America. It's just past 10:30 on LBC. The news headlines with Zora Sullivan.
Nick Abbot on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
0345 6060 973. Let's talk to Guildford. Hello, Alistair.
Hello, good evening.
Alistair.
Yes, I'm very surprised that a lot of general public are feeling that Boris is not doing enough. It's sad to see that everyone's saying that Great Britain are not stepping up, but they are. We're doing as much as we possibly can. If we go any further and start putting troops on the ground, I think we'll find that Putin may do something silly. And I feel that the general public need to know that if we go that far, he could be easily pressing buttons. So we're doing as much diplomatic stuff as we can. What we do need to do is send more military weaponry, anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft stuff, if we possibly can, without causing any more problems for ourselves. But I just wish that the general public would appreciate that Boris is doing as much as he possibly can behind the scenes, and he's doing an incredible job.
Well, that is one view. I mean, you could also say that he waited a very long time before placing sanctions on various oligarchs, plenty of time for them to move their assets to where the British government and the authorities couldn't get at them. And there's also some big names that are still off the list, and they've still refused to give back the 2 million or so pounds that they've received from Russians over the last few years. So not quite everything that he could possibly do.
No, there's always going to be the criticisms of what he can and what he can't do. But I know he's not the most popular prime minister we've got, but I supported initially, and I was an activist in the Conservative Party, and I was disheartened slightly what's been going on and what his been actions are doing. But yes, we can always say that he could have done more, but it's very frightening when someone's threatening you with nuclear war and want to press a button. You've got to tread very carefully. It's frightening. I'll be honest. We're frightened. My family's frightened of what's going on. I've got friends in Ukraine, and they're hunking down in the basement. So it is a frightening time, but it's hard. It is hard, and it's quite emotional to see it all happening. We thought we were going to be a peaceful world, but it's all gone tits up, hasn't it? Really, unfortunately.
Well, that's a blunt way of putting it. Yes, thanks, Alistair. 0345 6060 973. So Boris Johnson is doing all that he can? What are your thoughts about that? Pete texts, what about the sanitation and cleaning facilities of all those thousands of Ukrainians sheltering from danger are being deprived of? Their morale will rapidly disappear if they have to endure living this way for too long. Well, one of the things that seems to have come through loud and clear from the videos and the reporting is that the Ukrainians are seem to be very resolved and incredibly brave. Adam tweets, whilst I understand NATO's trigger for boots on the ground, I don't understand how the Western liberal democracies can stand by and watch this invasion without offering direct military support, particularly when we know what the outcome will be given the disparity. 0345 6060 973. We can join Simon Marks. He is in Washington, D.C. and gives us the view from over there. Hello, Simon.
Evening, Nick.
So, what's the latest?
Well, I think the big news tonight is this announcement that's come within the last hour, jointly from the White House, the European Commission, France, Germany, Italy, the UK and Canada, that on the face of it is announcing another raft of very punishing sanctions that the co-signatories of this effort say are designed to cripple the Russian economy. And the headline-grabbing nature of this is that they have now agreed to remove some Russian banks from the SWIFT interbank system. We've talked about this before. SWIFT is the big international payments messaging system that allows members of SWIFT, financial institutions all over the world, to send money to and from one another. This statement says that selected Russian banks are being removed from the SWIFT messaging system. I think there will be lots of questions about what that word selected means and why this is not applying to all Russian banks. They're also taking actions, they say, to prevent the Russian central bank, Russia's equivalent of the Bank of England, from deploying its international reserves to undermine the impact of the sanctions that have already been unveiled. They say that they are going after an additional group of individuals and entities who are facilitating the war in Ukraine and the harmful actions of the Russian government. They are limiting, and indeed the Germans have already announced tonight they are ending the sale of those so-called golden passports that have allowed so many Russian oligarchs to buy their way into citizenship in the UK and many other countries around the world. They say they are creating a transatlantic task force to ensure the effective implementation of their sanctions and stepping up coordination against disinformation and other forms of hybrid warfare. I mean, the headline that has been generated out of this announcement is the one relating to the SWIFT decision, because that has been a bone of contention between the United States and particularly Germany, but also a couple of other countries in Europe. There appears to have been a turnaround in that regard today, but also this move against the Russian central bank has additional potential really to make life extremely difficult for President Vladimir Putin and members of his inner circle in terms simply of engaging in fiscal transactions that involve the central bank and, of course, any banking institution in Russia that is selected to be barred from the SWIFT system. So this is clearly designed to continue making life increasingly difficult for Vladimir Putin, even as tonight, air raid warnings have been going off again in Ukraine, multiple reports of and warnings to people in Kyiv of a massive planned Russian bombardment that the Ukrainian government insists is going to be unleashed on the capital over the course of the next few hours.
It's an extraordinary situation, isn't it? The West is not at war, but in a sort of position of aggression towards a country that we are still continuing to buy their chief exports of oil and gas, and are in fact dependent on them for it.
Well, that is the principal difficulty, isn't it? I mean, President Biden, when he announced the most recent raft of sanctions a couple of days ago, was at great pains to convey to the American people the message that he understood that this conflict had the capacity to make the cost of petrol in the United States much more expensive. And, he said that it was uppermost in his mind to make sure that the cost of a price of a gallon of fuel was protected. Now, he's got limited tools at his disposal in order to do that. He can release stockpiles of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that they hold back here for times of emergency. But, once you've used a gallon of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve of it's gone, so at some point you've got to replace it. He's also carved out payments to Russia for oil and gas. They've been carved out of the sanctions that he's announced so far. And, it frankly became pretty clear that for the United States, there is a line here. America is with Ukraine, provided it doesn't result in Americans having to pay $5 a gallon to fill their cars. I mean, that was pretty evident from what the president said on Thursday night. And this, of course, has constrained the European response to all of this. I mean, the other big news of the day has been Germany's decision to send 1,000 anti-tank weapons and 500 Stinger missiles to Ukraine. A huge move by Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Arguably, beyond arguably, it should have come several weeks ago when the Germans were saying, no, we don't, as a matter of policy, ever send weaponry to combat zones, but we'll send them a few thousand helmets, which was greeted with barely concealed laughter and a degree of horror by the authorities in Ukraine. So today, Germany reversing that position and saying that the stakes in Europe now are so high that it can no longer maintain the argument that you don't supply lethal weaponry into combat zones. I mean, the question, of course, will be, can those weapons get now to Ukraine? Can the $350 million in additional assistance that President Biden announced earlier today in a tangible way be translated into help on the battlefield by the Ukrainians at a time when the country is under assault by land, sea and air from Russian forces? The issue pertaining to energy supplies hasn't changed, but there seems to be a growing realization in Western capitals that the stakes have reached a level where, to the best of each government's ability, they've got to minimize their concern about that and maximize their anxiety about whether the government of President Zelensky is going to survive.
Yes, the leaders in the West are at a disadvantage compared to the dictators in the East, in that they rely on their voters for their position. And the voters aren't going to be best pleased if the standard of living decreases dramatically. So it does really inform part of their reaction to this. Italy trying to carve out handbags and shoes, and the Germans insisting on not turning off the gas and the oil taps, and the Brits reluctant to discombobulate the banking system.
Yeah, managed democracy is how the Russians always used to describe their system. Vladimir Putin, of course, does face elections, but he always knows the outcome of the election before a single vote is cast. Joe Biden, of course, is in a very different position. He doesn't have that long to wait before midterm elections here in the United States that could deal his administration a massive blow as a result of Republicans retaking both houses of Congress. There were some signs here today of shifting attitudes. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, as Trump supporting a Republican as you can find in this country, has signed an order to see Russian goods and Russian produce, vodka and anything else that you can find for sale in Texas from Russia, to be removed from the shelves. We saw Tucker Carlson on Fox News last night significantly rowing back from his support of Vladimir Putin and instead beginning to articulate the argument that this is all Joe Biden's fault. But in a sense, the point that you were making there was kind of underscored by that announcement that we were talking about 24 hours ago, the decision by President Biden to sanction Vladimir Putin personally, because we got this statement from the United States Treasury explaining, delineating the nature of the sanctions against Vladimir Putin, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and members of the Russian National Security Council. And it noted at the top of the statement that it's very rare for the United States to sanction a head of another country's government, but now Vladimir Putin joins the ranks of shameless leaders of their country, including Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus, and Bashar al-Assad of Syria. So on the one hand, Vladimir Putin now joins a club of people who are considered, absolutely toxic, axis of evil, all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, sanctioning the other people on that list does not appear in any sense to have led to their removal from power. Kim Jong-un's hung on, Alexander Lukashenko's hung on, Bashar al-Assad has hung on with the active support of the man who now joins that list, Vladimir Putin. And so, it's not evident that sanctions themselves are going to lead to him being toppled.
Good to talk to you, Simon. Thanks for that. Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent. Your calls after the break, 0345 6060 973 LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, with Nick Abbot.
0345 6060 973. Hendon. Hello, John.
Oh, hi there. Evening, yeah.
John.
Yeah, I think playing with the SWIFT system isn't enough. I think all the countries in the world need to send soldiers to Ukraine. Otherwise, who's going to be next after Ukraine? It's just not enough what's being done. It's not enough.
So you think not just around the borders of Ukraine to stop the fighting bleeding into other countries, inside the nation itself?
I think Putin needs to see a message from everyone that this behaviour is not acceptable anymore. We can't have someone going rogue and then thinking he can go after country unstoppable. If you think that's all right and you think just turning off SWIFT is enough, then good luck. You'll see what happens. It's not going to stop him.
No, I think that's probably quite possible. But what is also possible is that we're not dealing with a man who's thinking rationally.
He's mad.
I mean, there's been a lot of people who've seen his ranting on television and drawn the conclusion that we're not dealing with someone who's really quite there. So is it possible that by doing what you're suggesting, we might actually make it significantly worse for everybody?
No, I think he's mad, and only madmen have to be stopped. There's only one way to stop them, and you can't, switching off SWIFT here and there is irrelevant. The money, he's got lots of money, it's hidden all over the place, you're never going to find it.
I wonder if by switching off SWIFT and making it much more difficult for people within Russia to, go about their normal everyday life, that it might actually precipitate his downfall from within.
Well, all right, let's bank on that one. Good luck, see what happens, but I doubt it.
All right, thanks, John. 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Email nicka@lbc.co.uk. If you're on Twitter, it's @LBC. Wanstead. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Nick. I've often thought before he ever attacked, he said it was exercise. Now, why didn't all the leaders all around the world take him a task and say, you said it was an exercise? Is your word not your bond, Mr. Putin? Because you seem like you want to be a warmonger, and tell him for what he is, because he's a liar and he's a warmonger and he's a very dictator and he's a megalomaniac. What he's doing, he doesn't want peace, because someone who wants peace, you don't threaten people, say you with nuclear weapons. I said this once on your radio show before. I said about Kim and John and Donald Trump, they need to talk, because mutual assured destruction, no one can win. And sure enough, I don't know if he was listening to Reuters or whatever he was doing, they actually met each other, Donald Trump and Kim and John, or whatever his name is. And they were saying about they're going to fire nuclear weapons at each other. So if he thinks that he can go into Ukraine and threaten us, America, Germany, all the countries with nuclear, and saying this will be the worst thing you could ever do, he seems very psychiatric to me. He seems like he's a manic depressive, and he seems like he's a megalomaniac. And I mean, I never forgot this. He rode around on a horse without his shirt on. I thought, you're very insecure. It's a very small man. No, I didn't take it as a joke. I took it very serious, that you are trying to flex your muscles. You're a very small man. You work for the KGB, and you went around on a horse. Now, if I was to do that, or used to do that, people think you're a complete crackpot. Say, well, what's Nick Abbot doing, or what's Mark doing? Riding around on a horse with his shirt off his back. Why do we want to see you, Mr. Putin, like that? Why don't you practice what you preach and say, well, was it an exercise? No. You've gone in, so now stop it before, and don't threaten us with nuclear weapons.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Some friends used to send me Vladimir Putin calendars as a joke. And every single month there'd be a picture of Vladimir Putin with his shirt off riding a horse, like that caller just described. Vladimir Putin with his shirt off wrestling a bear. Vladimir Putin with his shirt off cuddling a tiger. Vladimir Putin with his shirt off fishing. He seemed to be very confident, I suppose is not quite the right word, but his whole image is wrapped up in this sort of manly sporting thing. And just on that, I wonder if some of the actions against Russia participating in sporting events might have more of an effect on him personally than the various financial sanctions that actually won't touch him at all. 0345 6060 973 LBC. 3 minutes past 11, this is Nick Abbot on LBC. Boris Johnson says the UK will accept refugees from Ukraine. Are you ready to accept refugees fleeing the Ukraine conflict? Sunda Katwala is Director of British Future, an immigration and racial integration think tank. Hello, Sunda.
Good evening.
So what are your thoughts on the latest developments?
Well, obviously, there's a very fast-moving, very upsetting situation in Ukraine, and scenes that hopefully none of us would have wanted to see again happening in Europe of a war, and people already fleeing that war by train, by road, going to neighbouring countries. So in the first place, refugees from Ukraine are probably going to be going to countries like Poland, Moldova, Romania, Slovakia, next door to Ukraine. But I think the whole international community is going to have to get involved, and Britain has been part of the Refugee Convention for 70 years now, and so when there have been crises, whether it was Hungary in the 1950s, Syria in the last decade, there have been refugees coming to Britain. So I think it's right the Prime Minister is saying we will have to play our part as part of an international effort. There's no detail yet on how that's going to be organised, but as happened last summer with the Afghan evacuation, I think people do expect Britain to be part of international cooperation. Obviously, it works better if it's organised, so all the countries are playing part of the challenge of how we resettle people who need to flee. A lot of people from Ukraine, obviously, staying in Ukraine, men especially, want to be part of the defence of Ukraine. Women and children are leaving. People want to stay close, probably, to Ukraine where they can, but some people have got links to Britain and will want to come here, and I think we should be trying to make that as easy as possible, as unbureaucratic as possible in this very traumatic situation.
How confident are you that you can take Boris Johnson at his word on this? Because it is a regime that has defined itself with its resistance to foreigners coming to our shores.
Well, we've been through the whole Brexit debate, and we know that immigration was part of that debate, which was about people had lost confidence in how we were handling immigration in this country, and we had a big debate about that. On other issues of immigration, actually, we've seen a shifting of attitudes. I think we've got a new scheme to welcome Hong Kongers to Britain, which has been introduced by this government and has had support from the public and from across the party spectrum. We had special schemes for Syrian refugees and for Afghan refugees, because I think the reason that has broad support across parties in Parliament and from the public is if you have got the position, even if you've got doubts about immigration or you've got doubts about asylum claims, if you've got the position that your country should take genuine refugees, then there are certain cases, like what we're seeing in Ukraine now, like what we saw in Afghanistan, where that obviously meets that criteria. So unless you're going to be somebody who says, I shut the borders, turn them all away, you're going to have to do something to uphold that principle. So I expect to see all sides of the House of Commons saying to the government, we must do something. And then we need to get into the detail. What should that commitment be? How's it going to work? How do you organise it locally when people get here? But I hope there will be pressure from all sides of the House of Commons to see those words turned into proper policies.
Yes, but what do you make of... the government seems to be saying two things at the same time. They're saying, yes, we will welcome you with open arms, but you have to apply outside of Ukraine. And if you apply in a country that is outside Ukraine, would be, by definition at the moment, a safe country, and you will not be able to come to this country if you have first stepped foot in a safe country. So that's something of a catch-22, isn't it?
Yes, and I think you're right. There's a contradiction in the government's policy, and I think it puts the current asylum bill in the spotlight. So at the moment, they've made some very small changes for Ukrainians. Some people who are here on temporary visas can extend them. Some people who are, British citizens or relatives of British citizens, they're helping them come back to Britain. But there isn't a way, as you say, to claim asylum. So, in the days ahead, they will create, ways that you can apply for other visa routes, family reunification routes, etc. But they haven't got an asylum policy. And the flaw in the bill that you highlight is that we've got this commitment to refugee protection, but they're saying even if your claim is genuine, and 70% of people claiming asylum in the UK at the moment get their claim accepted by the British government, and it's quite hard to get accepted. I think it's quite a sceptical process. But the new bill, which hasn't been passed yet, says that depending on how you arrived, we might, we'll give you less protection. We'll give you temporary protection, not permanent protections. That's probably against the international rules that we've signed up for. So the government's got to, find a way through that. They'll be under pressure from opposition parties to drop that bill. I'm sure they'll probably stick to that bill. Or they've got to say, here's a new special scheme, as we have for Afghans, as we have for Syrians, for Ukrainians. But I do think it, as you say, it puts this sort of challenge about the way people deal with refugee issues. We see these scenes from Ukraine, as we saw from Afghanistan. We feel we must do our bit, but actually we're creating a system where there aren't safe ways to apply for asylum. So let's work out, what can you do? If you're a Ukrainian in Poland or in Romania with a link to Britain, we should be saying, we'll make it easy for you to claim. We're not trying to keep everybody away. We're trying to play our part of an international effort. So I think the government probably should rethink that legislation, or at least create routes for what the Prime Minister is saying that we know we need to do because of our history of refugee protection in this country.
There's about 50 million, something of that order, in Ukraine. What level of catastrophe might we be looking at here?
I mean, I wouldn't want to speculate on the first or second day, of this conflict. It might be, it's the worst conflict we've seen in Europe since the Yugoslav civil war. Obviously, that was a terrible tragedy. We did save the lives of thousands of people and thousands of families, but it's probably, it's a small part of what can happen. We'd all like to see this war stop. We'd all like to see the pressure in Russia, from the public or elsewhere on Vladimir Putin. We might see a very tragic situation. I think the key thing is international cooperation. The neighbouring states are going to need help, and then you're going to need an international scheme to have a managed, effective, fair, humane system for those who do have to leave. They probably want to go home when they can and when it's safe. Some people will end up, coming to Britain, Canada, America, other countries, leading their lives here. We have to make that work. So we don't know the scale of the situation, but I think all of the countries that are putting up flags, showing the colours, tweeting their solidarity, I think they have to play their part in managing the humanitarian consequences of this war.
Do you think it's incumbent on us to actually send aid, and particularly financial aid, to those countries that are surrounding Ukraine, because they're not the most wealthy of nations, are they?
I think that's right, and obviously there's a balance between playing our part in a resettlement program and supporting the neighbouring countries. A lot of Ukrainians will want to go to neighbouring countries. There are a lot of Ukrainians working in Poland over the last few years. A lot of people go there. Moldova's a tiny country, not a rich country at all, and it's taken tens of thousands of people in the first couple of days. So I think definitely part of the international effort is supporting the neighbouring countries, and part of it is organising a resettlement scheme as well. So that's definitely all got to be part of the plan. There are Ukrainians here in Britain already on short-term visas to pick fruit and so on. Probably 20,000 people last year came on that route. We should be making it quite easy for those people to stay and settle, because those are temporary schemes where they wouldn't have had those rights before. So there are lots of different aspects of what we can do, and I think the more that the governments that are talking about solidarity work together, the better organised a system we can have for Ukrainians themselves and for the different countries and communities who will be taking them in.
That's what the government can do. Just finally, what if people want to lend their help in some way, what can they do?
Well, I think it's a great question that you ask. I think people should look for verified sources of information for charities that are helping Ukrainians that they can trust. They can look at associations of people that are helping with that. And then I think a little bit further down the road, when we have people coming to this country, I think we should be organising a welcoming scheme. It's not just the job of the government to welcome people to our country. It's the job of people in schools and community groups and faith groups and so on. So I think we should all be ready to step up and play our part in that. But at the moment, as well as sharing the news or tweeting about it, I think finding out what people from Ukraine think that people in Britain can do is a really good thing to do, and the symbolic claims of solidarity are I think welcome, but I think practical support for charities working in Ukraine is a really positive practical thing that people can do as well.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for that. Sundar Katwala, a director of British Future, an immigration and racial integration think tank. So what are your thoughts? 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. Email nicka@lbc.co.uk. If you're on Twitter, it's @LBC. Let's go to the phones. Stevenage, EJ.
Hello, Nick. I was almost falling asleep there. Just want to say that is it bad advice to give weapons and aid the Ukrainians to fight back when they are so tiny compared to the Russians? Asking them to make homemade bombs and giving them weapons to fight. I think they should just surrender and get this thing over with, rather than trying to fight and have more bloodshed.
When you say you were about to fall asleep, in reference to what I was just talking about with that call?
No. I was waiting on the phone too long. But that's fine.
Right.
But this is the thing: is all those callers who are calling in to fight, they do not realise the size of the Ukrainian army and the people compared to the Russian might. And we know the Russians are coming in. They're not crazed killers. They're just not going to randomly kill everyone. They're there to do some operation. And they've actually said to lay down your arms, don't fight, don't resist. And the West is trying to give them weapons, not enough, but just a little bit of weapons here and there. And what will happen is when the Ukrainians use those weapons to kill a few Russians, the Russians will then get angry and then kill back again. So it's just, we need to bring it all down and go to diplomacy rather than fighting and weapons and bombs. And it's a crazy situation. And the West is really, I don't think they're helping. They're just hypocrites who go and bomb other places. Now they want to have a fire on Ukraine.
Well, that's the first time I've heard that opinion expressed. That doesn't sound like diplomacy. It sounds like capitulation.
But that's what the West is doing. They're trying to basically send in bits of arms, not going in properly, but then that would be a bad idea as for the West, because the West is also scared that anything can happen now. So basically it's best not to send weapons and ask them to make homemade bombs. Just, throw down the weapons, get a white flag, and just wait there until they basically surrender. No bloodshed. Nobody should be killed.
Right. So the answer to somebody invading your country is to just give up.
What do you think? Get killed, or give up? What would you do?
Well, the supposition that you're making is that if you show the white flag, that the Russians are going to be nice to you. Where's the evidence that that's true?
Easily true. I mean, do you not know the Russians by now, or do you think this is a new Russia that you just suddenly discovered in the last few days? Russians are there for a reason. They've never gone in and massacred anyone ever.
Well, that's completely untrue.
Times.
That's completely untrue. Vladimir Putin defines himself by his extreme reaction to any provocation. That's of all the opinions I thought I was going to get tonight. That's a surprise. All right, thanks, EJ. Any thoughts on that? 0345 6060 973 LBC.
This is LBC with Nick Abbot. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet @LBC. Text 84850.
Mary Struthers is the Amnesty International Regional Director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia and joins us on the phone. Hello, Mary.
Hello.
Mary, so what are your thoughts on what's been happening over the last few days?
Well, we've seen the worst fears realized. We have tens of thousands of Ukrainians who are approaching and entering the borders of Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. And we're calling upon all of the countries, as well as the UK, to allow them visa-free access, to allow them to have at least temporary accommodation, and routes to ensure that they can have a safe access to continue to on whatever destinations they wish to continue onwards.
Those countries that you just described, how easy will it be for them to accommodate a large number of people coming over the border?
Well, I would like to say that Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland have imposed visa-free regimes, which is wonderful. And they have, in the instance of Slovakia, assured that Ukrainians trying to cross the border will have access to not only temporary accommodation, but also free medical care. So this is really wonderful, and I would urge that the UK authorities provide the same thing.
What did you make of what Boris Johnson was saying, that he says we will, of course, welcome Ukrainian refugees, while at the same time his government is pushing through the Nationality and Borders Bill, which would prevent that exact thing happening?
He's not doing enough. He should be assuring visa-free access for Ukrainian nationals so that they can apply under the Geneva Refugee Convention for free and unlimited access to the UK and other European countries. And the UK, which is a relatively rich country within the European nations, should afford accommodation and healthcare, employment and training, and etc. Access to Ukrainian refugees.
The UN Refugee Agency called the plans that this government are pushing through, the Nationality and Borders Bill, deeply concerning. We are essentially criminalising the act of arriving in the UK to seek asylum. They say it violates the 1951 Refugee Convention. The government denies this. What's your thoughts on that?
The government is, in fact, effectively denying this. They are not right. They should be upholding the 1951 Convention, and they should be affording all Ukrainian refugees access to the UK in connection with the severe situation in Ukraine.
If the listeners want to give support to your organisation, how would they be able to do that?
Well, they can join up to Amnesty International, which is an organisation which denounces human rights violations, including all the international and humanitarian and human rights law violations. They can also contribute to UK organizations that are contributing to humanitarian activities in Ukraine, including support to women, elderly people, and children who are suffering from the ongoing violations in Ukraine.
Thanks for your time, Marie. Marie Struthers, Amnesty International Regional Director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia. You're listening to LBC. I'm Nick Abbott. The phone number here, 0345 6060 973. Let's talk to Regent's Park. Vance.
Hello, Nick.
Vance.
Nick, today, as usual, Saturdays, I went and got my paper and went to a local cafe to sit and read it for a couple of hours. And the young man sitting next to me was speaking in Russian softly. And then a young woman came in, and she turned out to be his girlfriend. And she was clearly really dejected, really depressed. And she went and sat by the window, and he put his arm around her. and I could see they were both crying. And so I went up to them and I said, "Sorry, are you from Ukraine?" That was the logical question. And they said, "No, we're Russians. We're from St. Petersburg." And they were absolutely distraught at Putin's move. They were ashamed of being Russian. They were both crying. And so I asked them a few questions and just let them talk, because that's what they needed. They wanted to talk. And they were telling me that none of their family back in St. Petersburg approve of Putin's war. None of their friends back in Russia approve of what Putin's doing. They were so ashamed and saddened by Putin's move. And I just wonder, Nick, if that is representative of the majority of Russian people, maybe Putin is already yesterday's man.
It's not the first time I've heard of people within Russia protesting against this. Some very prominent Russians have gone public with their opposition to the war, which, of course, if they're in Russia, is very brave of them. Yeah, but these two young people, they're here to study English. And I've never seen such sad youngsters, such a sad young couple before. And I think Putin might have overplayed his hand. OK, thank you for that, Vance. 0345 6060 973. There have been rallies across Russia as some very high-profile Russians from the worlds of entertainment, business and journalism have essentially risked their livelihoods and their lives, of course, to speak out against what's happening. Pop stars, actors, musicians, talk show hosts, television personalities and so on have all come together to voice their disapproval. Even some family members of Russia's richest businessman, the daughter of Roman Abramovich, for instance, posted an Instagram picture that read, "Putin wants a war with Ukraine," crossing out the word Russia. "The biggest and most successful lie of Kremlin's propaganda is that most Russians stand with Putin," she said. And Lisa Peskova, the daughter of the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, took to Instagram to post a simple message on a black background that says "No to war," which might not seem very much to us, but, of course, if you're in Russia, it means a very great deal indeed. 0345 6060 973. Let me read some text and emails. I'll get back to your calls after the news. Andy texts, "I think Putin is going on about denazification because this will resonate with Russians at home. The country has so many war memorials to the fallen heroes of the Great Patriotic War, World War II to us, which refer to Nazi invaders. It's an empty reference for us, but could mean something to the Russian people who are having the wool pulled over their eyes when he addresses them on Russian television." What's ironic about that, of course, is that the people that suffered the most from the Nazi advancement were Ukrainians, just by dint of geography. Chris texts, "When is Boris Johnson going to shut up if he has nothing to offer? And why does Russia still have a UN veto?" Ash says, "How come Britain is always first to intervene and show solidarity, but always runs away before finishing the task? We should stay the course." For example, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, to name a few. We are with Ukraine. I have a few friends who are in fear of their lives and their loved ones. Peace is the answer, not war. And Chris says, "Always remember a country is not defined by its leader, but by its people. I feel sorry for the poor Russians who just want to live their lives. This only ends one way." 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Email nick@lbc.co.uk. And if you're on Twitter, it's @LBC. This is LBC, the news headlines at 11:30 with Zora Suleiman.
Nick Abbot on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
That was interesting news about Elon Musk. It's interesting that the sort of power that used to only be available to nations, that could only be wielded by the governments of countries, is now in the hands of individuals. Vladimir Putin might be able to turn Ukraine's internet off, but Elon Musk can turn it back on again. And there's also the hacking organisation